We'd like to thank Mainspring Companies for sponsoring Season 1 of The Next Entrepreneur. Mainspring celebrates the entrepreneurial journey, and we are very grateful for their support.
Tiger Stadium was just immense amount of pride, you know, to be selected for that and to be able to build in a place that, it's pretty hallowed ground around Baton Rouge. So that was a lot of fun, and to pull off what was a pretty intense schedule. The success of all those projects generally are the people you work with.
Absolutely.
And that you continue the relationships, because that's really how we've been able to build our business, is just, continuing relationships, providing a great service, but becoming friends or becoming essential to that business's success.
Welcome to the Next Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew McClendon. I'm the host of your podcast. I'm here with our producer, Mr. Daniel Sagona. Daniel, good to see you again, sir. And we are glad to have our guest, Mr. Mike Polito, join us. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, man, I tell you what, Mike and I have known one another for most of our lives,
Forever.
And it is a great honor to have you.
Likewise.
I have watched Mike from front row seat, maybe it's fair to say, here in the same city, and it is amazing what he has accomplished. He is the founder and CEO of MAPP Construction, headquartered here in Baton Rouge. He is an entrepreneur extraordinaire, and has not only survived that challenging commercial construction industry for 29 years, but he has thrived. For many years, his revenues have been upwards of $200 million per year. Is that fair?
In that range, yeah.
And collectively, MAPP has performed over $4 billion worth of work. Just an amazing accomplishment, and something that any budding entrepreneur would look at and consider to be very daunting. But congratulations, Mike.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Yeah, you have several offices and have worked all over the United States. So, Mike, so our listeners can have a better idea of what it is that you do. Could you please tell us what it is that MAPP Construction does?
We're a commercial general contractor, so we build buildings across the Southeast and now in the Midwest, are our two major markets, if you wanted to say that, if you want areas. So we do everything from restaurants to theaters, retail. We do a lot of retail work, hospitality work in the restaurant industry. We work up and down the plants in the Mississippi River. So anything that's a building that's not apartments, multifamily, we'll do. Any kind of residential we stay away from, unless it's part of a mixed-use facility, a retail restaurant that has maybe a couple of stories of apartments on top of it. We would do that. But other than that, we'll do anything that's a building. Somebody give us a contract, we'll build it.
Yeah, you have not backed down from much over the years. You've tackled some major projects, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But let's dial it back a little bit, and back to, say, 1985, when you graduated from the Louisiana State University Department of Construction. I just want to interrupt that thought to say it's really quite amazing to consider that you are now in that department's Hall of Fame.
That's true, yeah. It's pretty wild, isn't it?
That is cool. Yeah. And I'm just
never would have thought that based on my grades in construction management.
Well, I was going to ask you back then, because we were in the same program, if how far I thought that may have been from you at that time that you'd end up in that department's Hall of Fame.
That would not have been high on my thoughts. That was quite an honor. It was much appreciated. But at the end of the day, in college we were just trying to get out, if I remember correctly, both of us.
That's right. Yeah. And getting out in the midst of a pretty steep recession.
It was a huge, right? Yeah. It was hard to get a job.
And so let's take it from there. So you get out of college. And did you head east pretty
Went to
quick?
Atlanta. I decided, back then it was, Baton Rouge really didn't have a lot going on. There was only a few contractors that, especially in the commercial arena. I decided I wanted to go into commercial construction. The industrial construction companies, Brown and Root and floor, and all those guys were hiring, but I didn't really want to do that.
Right.
And Atlanta was kind of the city that most people in Louisiana, in Baton Rouge and LSU, weren't paying attention to. They would go to Houston and or Dallas, and so I set my sights on Atlanta and went over there and tried to get a job, and did. I found a job in Atlanta, so I went to work for MAPP Construction in Atlanta, which was a big, I say big, at the time, Beers was certainly a $100 and some odd $1 million a year company, which in 1985 was a lot of money, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so I went to work there as a project manager.
And so were they, how far was their reach?
At that time, Beers was probably one of the larger contractors in the state of Georgia. They were a healthcare contractor. They did a tremendous amount of hospital work, other stuff as well, university work, but they were really focused on healthcare. I worked for the group that did a little bit of healthcare, and we also did some work on campuses. Like I did some projects at Georgia Tech and Emory University.
You were there for a while, and then you moved on to McDevitt and Street. Is that right?
Yeah, I worked at Beers until 87, maybe middle of 87, so 3 years, and then McDevitt and Street, which was a national contractor, and they, at the time, were probably, in fact, they were the largest non-union commercial contractor in the country. And I went to work for them in Raleigh, North Carolina. Okay. And I worked for a couple of years with them, and did more. I guess I don't want to say larger projects, but more sophisticated projects. I did a couple of labs in the research park, and then also did some development work with their development group. So it's a good experience. Both of those companies were.
And so when you wrapped up that experience, were you then heading back to Baton Rouge?
My goal was always to get back to Louisiana and get back to Baton Rouge. That was one of the things when I resigned at Beers. I told them I was taking a job at McDevitt Street in North Carolina. They asked me why, and I told them it's because I wanted to get back to Baton Rouge, which was odd to go to North Carolina. Right. But working for a national company, I thought it would be better for my resume. People might know it better, and it would be easier for me to get a job. And so I got a job with Landis & James in New Orleans. Okay. So I worked for the better part of a year and a half, 2 years with Landis & James, and did a tremendous amount of healthcare work with them. And so that was my next step.
So at what point did you realize that you had the entrepreneurial drive and wanted to open your own business? Was that earlier on? Or
Andrew, I'm not sure that I really had, quote unquote, this burning desire to start my own company.
That's interesting.
I think that in what I had, and I actually have one of the things McDevitt Street taught me was business and how to motivate people. And one of the exercises that we did the very first month I went to work for McDevitt Street in North Carolina, we went through a seminar, and this process of putting together your own personal 5-year business plan. I still have it.
Wow.
And, at the time, my goal was to run, in 5 years, was to run a division of McDevitt Street. Right. That was a realistic goal. It was something that I thought I could achieve. And so there really wasn't anything on the horizon that said, go start your own business. I was just kind of fortunate so I wanted to run something, but right. I didn't know, I talked to some folks. I called Markham McKnight when I was working at McDevitt Street. And I said, if I could start my own thing, how do I get a bond? Because that's one of the things in our business, that if you can't bond work, it's hard. I know when you started, you really started fresh out the paint. You didn't have the luxury that I actually had when I did get started, where I had a backer that helped me get bonds. And so your story is a little different than mine. Right. But Markham told me, he says it's all about capital. You got to have money. And I didn't have any money, so I didn't think about that was really an option. And I was working at Landis & James, and we had done real well. And I met a fella at an award ceremony. The group that I led for a project we did, we won an award. We're at Drusilla Seafood accepting the award, and Lane Grigsby walked up and said, "Hey, Mike, I've heard a lot about you, whatever." Started kind of fluffing me up a little bit. And so I figured he was going to offer me a job, right? Right. But And I wanted to get back to Baton Rouge, so I was listening, right?
Right, sure.
And so I told him, why don't you come meet us for the after party at the patio lounge? So we went to the patio lounge, and in walks Lane and his wife, Bobby, and 6 beers later, we were in business. And so, to say that I had this burning desire, it was scary for me. I had a good job. I was on a fast track with the company I was with, and I felt like I was in good shape. So it was a little scary for me.
Yeah, so this is one of the reasons that I wanted to talk with you is to try to identify for our listeners who are budding entrepreneurs that can view your model as a viable model to enter business. So let's dig into a little bit of the details, whatever you're comfortable sharing with us about how you do that. So you have an investor. And it just so happens that this investor was in the industrial construction or municipal type construction.
Yeah, at that time they were mostly municipal.
And so, help me understand what that initial start looked like. You were doing some things, and maybe his shop was doing other things, and maybe providing capital for bonding or things like that. But
the structure was really simple. Cajun, which is the name of the company that Lane owned, took care of my accounting. So they did all the accounting. They did all of the project accounting. So I was able to start out with a fairly sophisticated accounting platform.
I see.
So they did all that. Obviously, Lane signed for the bonds, or in other words, he was the one that backed the bonds for I guess the first couple of years,
right.
And then we got on our own bond line. The structure was Lane owned a percentage. I think at the time he owned maybe 15%, and he had a partner that also owned 15%. But what Lane did is he brought some of his people at Cajun into the company and gave them small percentages, and then I owned 50%. Right. He owned 51% of the voting stock, and then so that's how we got started, and that was the structure. So he provided the bonding, and I did the work.
So y'all did that for a number of years.
We were on his bond line for a couple of years,
right.
And then we broke into our own bond line, I guess probably year 3, year 4, after we'd made some money.
I see.
And certainly if we had needed a bigger bond, which we didn't at that point, we were still doing small work,
right.
or small enough work that our capital had caught up to the company, and so we never had to go back and get any bonds based off of his bond line. But after year 2 or 3, we went on our own bond line, and shortly, I guess that was 91, and we bought Lane out in 99, I think, somewhere in that range. So after the company was successful for a period of time, Lane realized that, Lane, very generous guy.
Right.
But it was an investment, and
sure.
And so he was looking for a return, and so at that point he realized there was really nothing more that he was doing for us, and so it was time for him to kind of back away, and we bought him out.
Okay, so I was curious so there's a model that can be used for an entrepreneur to get in business where they're using an investor, in this case an investor that brings some management capacity to the table as well. But then you not only got into that successfully, but you navigated through it and you exited it successfully.
That's right.
And I was just curious if you had any advice that you would give to someone that would consider that path from lessons learned of how they may do that as successfully as you did.
I was fortunate. Lane's a heck of a guy. Yeah. And so I think being with the right partner is probably the most important thing. Partnerships are not always successful, different personalities, but this one was for the time that I needed it. I've seen people that actually don't do the legal work in setting it up,
right?
So that there is an exit strategy and that everybody knows what's going to happen when that is an exit strategy, who's going to get paid when and how they're going to get paid.
Right.
Because, we were able to finance the buyout. I didn't have to pay him in one big chunk.
Right.
Our industry, capital is very important.
Right.
Because you have to bond work, so you have to have so much working capital, and you have to be able to pay your bills. So if I would have had to go pay him all in one chunk, which he certainly, if it wouldn't have been in writing, could have demanded. Not that he would have, but those are the kind of things I think that are important, is make sure you got it in writing, make sure you understand how the investor is going to exit. It should be thought about, or at least contemplated at the beginning.
And so what's interesting about that, though, is you both must have been pretty good judgments of character from that initial conversation, in which you decided in a fairly short period of time, maybe one evening, that, hey, this has a viable potential here.
Yeah.
And you ultimately executed on that. And so you did have all of the, as a sophisticated business owner, like Lane was at that time, y'all went into it with all the right documentation.
Oh, absolutely.
And an operating agreement that showed how that would be exited.
Yeah, as far as Lane came with reputation. I knew by reputation.
Sure,
he had a great business and was a stand-up guy. I'm not sure he completely knew enough about me to make that judgment, but it worked out for him.
Yeah. Well, you're a pretty impressive individual, and that's no surprise that he got a good read on that pretty quickly. So that's cool. That's a really interesting way. And I really wanted to focus in on that, because as you mentioned, it is hard to get in that business. You can start small in construction business in a market or with clients where bonding's not required, but that's somewhat limiting. And so in order to get to that bonding point and the capital that you need to have to fund that line, that's not easy to do coming out of the box. So that was a really cool approach that you took there. So by the time that happened, did you say that the buyout occurred in 99?
Yeah, that's my memory. Right. 99 or 2000. Whenever we started it's right around the time we started the Shaw Building project over for Mike Wombo. It was in that time frame.
Okay. So let's back up a little bit from there, because I think it was before then. You were still fairly young in business, and I remember you describing this one project that you did in downtown Baton Rouge for a casino as a watershed type project. Is that the right word?
That would be a great word, yeah.
And so tell us how, number one, tell us how old your company was at that point, how you talked and your way into that project, how you sold your company to perform that work over a lot of big boy competition, and then how it became transformational to your business.
Well, I'll answer the last. It became transformational because we made a bunch of money doing it, and we succeeded, and the project was successful. So obviously, now you have capital.
Right.
You've made some money, so your company can blossom, and you also get a lot of people from that. But the way we went about it, the growth of MAPP at every point that you can see growth, it's always because people, something to do with people. And as you know, that's what our business is all about. You have to have great people. But it's people taking a great big leap of faith in MAPP. And so in this particular instance, shortly before that project came out, maybe about a year before, and we were probably, 3.5 years old. So, nobody would have anticipated us winning this project, which at the time was about a $40 million project.
That's unbelievable.
And so, but about 6 months to a year before that, I'd gotten a call from Richard Setliff. And Richard was, in the commercial construction industry in Baton Rouge was iconic.
Right.
And he had gone down to New Orleans. Tudor Construction had gone out of business in Baton Rouge, which is, his big client here was Jimmy Swaggart. And he had gone down to New Orleans to run a construction company down there, Bryce, which is another phenomenal construction company. But his wife didn't, and they decided they didn't want to move to New Orleans. So he called me out of the blue. I'd stayed in touch with Richard, trying to get a job with Richard at Tudor Construction for years. Right. And interesting story. But so he called me and said, "Hey, look, I hear you're doing well. What do you think?" And so I jumped, at the chance of getting Richard on board and made him, a minority partner and brought him in. And so immediately credibility in the Baton Rouge community, and immediately when you start to chase a $40 million project, you have some pretty good resumes and references, including my own. So we just went after it. I mean, I don't know how better to say is that we did not. Everybody kind of thought we were foolish in doing it, but we just made sure that we made every possible contact with that organization. So across the board, there was a fellow by the name of Steve Urey, I believe was his name, was the actual owner of the development, and he was out of Reno. And so, I did everything I could to make sure that I met him. And I met Mark Bradley and Cleve Townsend. And so over the course of about a month to 6 weeks, I'd infiltrated and gotten to know these people. And then we made a presentation. And the reality is, because they interviewed 4 or 5 local contractors, and they wanted to use a local contractor to their credit. And the big boys, all the guys that you say, and we were just little peons. But the reality is we had the best team. Myself, Richard, and a superintendent we had, Julius Strother, who had built most of Jimmy Swaggart, and Roy Akeland. And when you put that team in front of them, there was nobody that could match that team to run their project. Right. And we were gonna run it with that team. It wasn't, we had other projects, but that was gonna be the project. And I don't think there was much choice. And I think we made a great presentation, and we had a good plan.
I remember asking an architect, Gary Gilbert, who was in on the design and maybe in on the presentations, and he and I were on a project one day, and I said, "Gary, you were in there, I think. How in the world did Mike Polito sell that deal? I mean, like you said, you were 3.5 years old. This was a $40 million project. It was unfathomable how you could have pulled that off." And he said something that stuck with me. He said, Mike told him, "Look, no one's put a glass dome over Catfish Town before, so don't let anyone try to convince you otherwise."
It's true.
And I thought, man, that is cool. Well, look, let's break there for a minute, and we'll take a word from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. MBD Automation is a proud sponsor for the Next Entrepreneur podcast, and we welcome them to the show. MBD Automation is a mechanical install contractor who installs conveyor systems and automated equipment, VRCs and singulators and sorters and all sorts of equipment that you'll find in e-commerce fulfillment centers, distribution centers, mail processing facilities, airports, and the industrial market, and in the defense industry. MBD Automation works all over the United States and has a list of international clients that they perform work for in the U.S. as well. When you're looking for your next mechanical install contractor, reach out to MBD Automation. They can be found on the internet at mbdautomation.com. Okay, we're back with Mike Polito, CEO and founder of MAPP Construction. Mike, we got to the point where your business is now ready to expand. You've tackled some, super impressive projects as a young company. And it looks like you're at a point now where you're ready to expand beyond your Baton Rouge office. So can you walk us through a little bit of what's your expansion look like? And if you can talk to the relevance of the McDevitt and Street model as far as being regional and how that factored in your expansion plan.
Sure. McDevitt and Street's model was to follow their clients. And so they grew. Bob Street he was a second generation owner, and he took a company that was based in Charlotte, North Carolina, from $75 million in 1975 to $800 million in 1985. So I mean, he had a very unique concept of how to expand and how to allow people to empower themselves. And so we tried to model it off of that and say that, look, we're going to expand with clients, but we needed to, Baton Rouge is a great market, but it's not a big market, right. And there's plenty of competition. And so we knew we could do X amount, or at least we thought we could do X amount a year profitably in Baton Rouge. And so I wanted to be bigger than that. I didn't have an aspiration to really be a small construction company, and I wanted to grow it and see how large we could get, and while being successful. And so we put together a strategy. And when I say we, it was myself, Richard Sutliff, and at that time we'd hired a fellow by the name of Mark Lahaye.
Right.
And it was the three of us, and we decided we just kind of picked a number that we wanted to grow to maybe 90 million over the next 5 or 6 years. And so we thought we could do 30 million in 3 locations. And we were fortunate at the time to get some work in New Orleans, and so it was a natural thing to go down to New Orleans and open an office. And so we were looking to find another location, and we really relied on, I think it goes back, we relied on trying to find the right person for that location. Neither one of us were going to move anywhere to open an office. We were all entrenched in Baton Rouge. So we went on a kind of a personnel search, and we found a fellow in Dallas named Pat Hermser, and he started our business in Dallas, and so we knew that we had to diversify geographically to grow to the size that we wanted to be, or that we were comfortable in being, and so that was our strategy, is to get some geographical growth. We didn't have a client in Dallas at the time, so it was a little bit more finding the right person. And once we met Pat, we knew, we just kind of had that feeling that he fit in and that he was going to be the right guy, and he was. He ran that business for better part of 20 years for us. Yeah,
that's amazing. So I was curious if you could give our listeners a glimpse of what's involved in a separate office setup. And I think you probably just hit on the single most important thing, the personnel. But is there anything else that sticks out as being critical in that decision-making process?
In the decision-making process, I would say no. Ultimately, it really was about the person.
Gotcha.
To go all the way to Dallas to do something, we had to find the right person and believe in it and have a mindset, because you can, it's different. You can't touch those projects and touch that office every day like you can in Baton Rouge and New Orleans. And so anytime you're going to get far flung, you have to have the right person to lead it. Most people, I would think, try to promote from within. We just didn't. That wasn't our deal, and we were trying to grow faster than waiting on that. We didn't want to wait on that. So you have to find the talent. But some of the other things that I think we learned over the time is, there's different laws, there's different tax structures, there's all those things that you have to ultimately understand. Texas, another reason that it was easy to go into Texas is their licensing requirements are not nearly as intense as other states. So it made a lot of sense from that regard, since we were still a pretty young company.
So I'm trying to think, of some of your iconic projects that happened during that expansion phase, pre-recession. I think of the LSU Tiger Stadium edition. Mm-hmm. I think of the Shaw Building.
Right.
What was that, 18 stories maybe?
13.
13 stories. And you had a number of really impressive and significant wins during that time. Are there any of those that stand out to you as being like projects that you're just super proud of?
Well, they all are. But the one thing that over time you begin to realize that every project is hard and difficult and worth being proud of. But yeah, we had some big wins. I call them ego projects. We were fortunate enough to be involved in a bunch of them. Over the years, Catfish Town being the first one, which was a huge one. Shaw was probably one of the more successful of the group for a lot of reasons. I remain very close friends with the owners of Wampold companies. Mike Wampold and Ted Terrell are still very good friends. So that's a lot of success.
Right.
Tiger Stadium was just immense amount of pride, to be selected for that and to be able to build in a place that, it's pretty hallowed ground around Baton Rouge. So that was a lot of fun. And to pull off what was a pretty intense schedule. It was, I remember the architect for the project is a national architect out of, I want to say Kansas City, HOK.
Right.
And I can remember they told the TAF on groundbreaking that the TAF needed to have alternative plans for the first couple of games because there was no way they thought that we could make the schedule. So that was a big, we did, and it was a great accomplishment. So those were some big projects. We did the Chevron corporate headquarters in Covington, which was a really big project that you don't know much about because it's in Covington and we don't see it very much.
Was that like 300,000 square feet or something?
It was in that range, 280 to 300,000 square feet, big parking garage. And so, it was a lot of fun. And worked for Chevron, what a great company. I think that's a lot. But, the success of all of those projects generally are the people you work with.
Absolutely.
And that you continue the relationships, because that's really how we've been able to build our business is just, continuing relationships, providing a great service, but becoming friends or becoming essential to that business's success. And that's what I think we try to do best.
So look, I don't want to cut short on any of the success that you had in those first 15 years, but it was a tremendous amount. And
we had a lot of fun.
Yeah, the list of projects and wins that you guys had was just super impressive. But I do want to talk a bit about the recession, that 2010 recession, and how extremely difficult that was on so many parts of our economy, but certainly brutal on the construction industry, right? So I'm curious how you survived that when so many in the industry did not.
We survived the 2001 recession, and which was certainly not as deep. And but we were in Dallas, and in 2001 the telecom corridor in Dallas went to nothing. And we were doing a tremendous amount of work, in that area. So we had gone through in 2001, and we had made a strategic decision not to shrink our overhead and to not let people go and survive and then come out of it faster than other people. And it was a successful strategy. In 2009, 2010, that was just not possible.
Right.
It was so deep. We went from a $225 million a year company in 2008 or 2009 to $130 million overnight. Literally in 8 weeks, we had $70 million worth of projects that were going to start within 60 days, all go away. And so that was tough. And we, that's when there's an old saying that, presidents and CEOs of companies always, the first thing they have to do is whatever's in the best interest of the business. When you start, because what's in the best interest of the business ultimately is what's in the best interest of the people that work with you. And so sometimes you have to make some tough decisions. And so that was just one of those times that, I'm in a peer group. That's another thing that I think, when you talk about being an entrepreneur, not everybody's an entrepreneur. Not everybody's running a business. And so you never, I had a mentor in Lane that I could bounce things off of. But at some point that went away.
Right.
And so you have to have people around you. But so in 09 and 10, our peer group, which has got, companies all across the United States, we're all looking at each other like, holy cow, what are we going to do? And we all had to make some tough decisions, but it was good to have that group because you got ideas of how to make those tough decisions. Some people put people on furlough, some people laid people off, some people reduced salaries. And so you take all of those kind of recipes, you come up with your own recipe, and then you hold on until you can get out of it. And we never, interestingly enough, I don't think we ever lost money during that period. We had some pretty lean years, but that was our strategy. We did. We couldn't hold on to everybody, and so we had to let some folks go. Unfortunately,
sure. So, were there some things that you learned during the recession that impacted how you managed differently post-recession? Or did you just kind of go back to?
No, I think what we did was we really, not out of any brilliant strategy, but we did change our company. We became less reliant on big projects. Right. Big projects take a lot of your resources. They're risky. And our model for years and years was have one big project and then a bunch of smaller projects, and then a bunch of medium-sized projects. Get a nice pyramid of revenue of projects, and we really we got away from that, and so we're not out there right now, building $60-70 million projects. We're much more focused on long-term relationships,
right.
Repeat clients that are going to continue to build. And hopefully through recessions. Right. And so we also decided that we needed a somewhat recession-proof. One of the things we did was we went back into the public market, which was we had gotten completely away from having to bid in the public market, and we went back into that because there was some work there. We were successful in that for a little while, and then just as soon as we could, we got away from it again. But so we went into different markets. We decided, okay, well, we're going to go into healthcare. We knew we would never be as successful in healthcare in Baton Rouge as our competition, just because they're entrenched there.
Oh yeah, the relationships are so deep.
It's hard, so we had to get on the fringes. But we've been able to build a healthcare resume that in the event of another turn down, which there will be one, that we'll have some healthcare opportunities that we can fall back on. So that was one strategy that we pursued. And at the same time, we call it the Texas strategy. We just completely put a tremendous amount of resources into Texas. And right. we thought that was just a big market that was exploding. It's proven true.
So you announced the opening of an Austin office recently.
Yeah.
How excited are you about that?
I'm real excited. It's that place is blowing up. You live there,
right.
So you can see it happening right in front of your eyes. But it's a great market, great talent. Again, it goes back to, we decided we're going to go to Austin. And so how are we going to find the right person? Because interestingly enough, all of our people in Dallas had no real desire to go to Austin. We had one guy that wanted to go, and he's going there now. And all the people in Baton Rouge want to stay in Baton Rouge. So we went to Austin, and I was amazed at the talent that was put in front of us. And we we brought a young lady on, Mae Vlamming, who is going to knock it out the park over there. She's just going to be a rock star.
Well, look, Texas is an amazing market. Austin, Dallas, Houston, it's that strategy makes perfect sense. Change gears here real quick, Mike. And I want to talk real quickly about culture, because from what I see from what you've created at MAPP Construction, culture is a really big part of what you do, and it comes clear through in your message. And I just wanted to see if you could briefly tell us about the importance of culture in the growth of your business?
Well, I think it's been huge. I think it's one of the determining factors of our success, especially with people. Again, it goes back to, who your people are. And to retain people, you have to provide them a workplace that they enjoy being in. Otherwise, they're not going to stay. There's too many competitors that, the term war for talent is real. People are out there escalating salaries and offering, we just tried to hire a guy in Dallas. If I told you what the package he was trying to obtain, you'd die. And we weren't successful in getting him. But because sometimes at some point in time it doesn't make sense. But we get people because they hear it's a great place to work. We've been fortunate enough to be named one of the best places to work for years now. So culture is important, but here's the thing about culture is it doesn't just happen. You have to work at it, and what I tell our people all the time, we enjoy each other's company, but you have to work at it. So you have to define what your culture is, what you want it to be, and then people have to work at it. An example I give you is we work for a lot of the petrochemical companies, right, and the oil and gas companies, and so Shell Oil, they're and all these companies are big on safety, so they have a great safety culture,
right.
And they we were touring the facility at Shell one day, and we went into the exercise room at their fitness center or whatever they have in Houston, and so there are about 8 or 10 people on a treadmill. All 10 people, if there were 10, had the little safety device hooked up to their belt. Now you tell me where you can go and see that.
Right.
But it's because they work at their culture, and their culture is meant to be a safe culture. And so if you want to have a fun culture or you have to work at it. And that's what I tell our people all the time is that it doesn't just happen. You have to intentionally get to know your roommate, so to speak.
Yeah, well, you do a great job of that, building culture, and it reads through in your in your social media content and everything that I see out there about your company.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we will take a break right now for a word from a sponsor. Modus is a proud sponsor for the Next Entrepreneur podcast, and we welcome them to the show. Modus is a national facilities services company performing work for Fortune 500 companies all over the United States. So who is Modus and what do they do? These guys do the non-mechanical installations inside big distribution and fulfillment centers. So the way they like to say it is they take it from the conveyor to the dock door. What does that mean? It means they're building the pick stations. They're doing all the cabling for all of the electronic equipment. They're putting in bollards and barricades and signage and tape on the floor. And these are in huge facilities. They work in really tight time frames. They've never missed a schedule. So if you need help with your facility services in your distribution facilities, reach out to Modus. Modus can be found at modusmoves.com. Okay, we're back with Mike Polito, CEO and founder of MAPP Construction, entrepreneur extraordinaire. Mike, so good to hear the story you've told about the growth of your business. And I think one thing that's really reads true about you is your leadership skill. And I can say that that has probably been something that I have seen from you from a very early age, right? I think you displayed that as a young man. But particularly in this industry where you have to navigate through the cyclical nature of the industry, and you're a survivor and at a very high level. So I wanted to ask if you could tell us of any time where you thought that you did a great job as a leader navigating through a period of either great achievement or major setback.
Wow.
Like you were, whether it was a big win or a big learning lesson that you said, hey man, that was tough, or that was great. And you know what? I did a good job with that. Because I'm going to ask you the opposite of that question next.
I think the company did a good job of weathering the 2 recessions, and so those were major setbacks. That I think that I'm not a real big planner. I'm not the most organized person in the world, and so a lot of people. So I think in those times of crisis, and there have been some others, but those times of crisis, organization and planning are important.
Right.
It's not my strength.
Right.
I'm more of a strategic. Let's go. And just take the hill, right? Kind of guy, and. So it took a lot of that, and I think we did a good job of that at the end of the day. While both were different strategies and that we executed, and we weathered the storm. There was another time, and it's not so far, not so distant, where we had a couple of years of really poor execution. Every business goes through cycles. And I can't remember if it was 2012, 13, or 14, but coming out of the recession, now the work is back.
Right.
And so you're building back up that backlog, and now you got to execute it again. And maybe you have new teams, and maybe you have some failures. Well, not maybe, we did. We had some projects that went okay, but they weren't to our standard, and we weren't executing the way we were supposed to. And because you have to, at the end of the day, you have to finish on time, and you have to provide the client with what they're doing, what they need. You may spend some money that you didn't intend to spend to do that. And so you're not as successful. And so you have some bad years, you have some lean years. And that was tough, because we had not had that.
Right.
And like I said, even through the recession, we made money through the recession. But I can't remember if it was 13, 14, whatever it is. We had our first losing year.
I see. And
that was tough. And you couple that with, other things, and all of a sudden now everybody's looking at you a little harder. Your banking company, your bonding company, everybody's looking at you a little bit harder. And so navigating that, and I couldn't have done it without the people that I had in the organization. Griff McEwen was our CFO, and he was, just the best. And the two of us did a great job, I think, of navigating that without it getting to be rampant and becoming a problem. So then we had to, obviously you get through all that, but you have to really focus on execution. And so that was something that we did, and I think we weathered that storm pretty well.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to ask you if there's an example where you felt like, you know what, I just could have flubbed that up. Looking back on that situation, I could have been more of a leader, or done it differently, or made some different decisions. And I'm curious if you have an example of that, and maybe what you learned from that.
Yeah, I do. There's it comes back to people and how you work with people. And we had the guy that was running our Dallas office for how many years. He ran it, and he was going through some personal problems that we had tried to work with him, and
right.
And so I can remember offering him, please take some time off, and we did that over a course of period of time. And then I gave him an ultimatum, and I wish I'd never done that.
Yeah.
He was a very important part of our organization. It's worked out for both of us. He's running his own business now, doing fantastic. But I think that would be a point where I could have done what I would normally have done, which is kind of be more thoughtful about how that was going to work out.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where maybe you ask yourself, So if I don't work this out with this guy, what's the best thing that could happen? What's the worst thing that could happen? Well, if it's a good thing that, it turned out well, but he was able to become a competitor maybe.
He is a competitor.
And so, there's things to learn from all that. Not that you necessarily could have worked it out anyway, but maybe.
That's right. You just don't know how it could have worked out. But that's one thing that I regret.
And I wanted to touch on marketing and ask you how critical social media platforms are in the execution of your marketing plan.
It's getting more and more and more a part of it. I guess 2 or 3 years ago, I started focusing on myself a little bit on just trying to post, on LinkedIn or whatever. And so, it's becoming more and more, I look at it every day, how many people are following MAPP, how many people are following our competitors. So I think it's important to drive those numbers up. I don't know that it gets us any projects. I read a book called Friction, which I recommend to everyone, and I was actually fortunate enough to have the author come speak to our peer group after having read the book. But his focus, and it's all about marketing, is trying to eliminate the friction between relationships and the friction points. That Uber has eliminated the friction point of hailing a taxi, having to pay, get out the car, find your wallet, all these points that they've made it simpler and easier. Right. And when you take that in perspective, it's the social media platforms that are out there. Everything's a touch point, and the reality is our most of our business comes from companies that are national companies. Not all of it, but most of our business comes from companies. So a lot of the decision makers, their first glimpse of us is our website. Their second glimpse of us may be on LinkedIn, because now they've become connected to us. And so every touch point has to portray that image. And so it's so important to have a strategic plan of what that brand you want to present. So it's critical, because they don't have to call me and say, "Can you send me a qualification package?" They just go to the website. Right.
Yeah. Well, they know right off the bat whether you're genuinely qualified or not, just from the initial glimpse at your website.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, let's start to wrap this up, Mike. And I wanted to ask a few last questions here. And you may have been asked this before, but knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to a 25-year-old Mike Polito?
Jump in. No, I think that the best thing that ever happened to me was getting away and seeing how the industry that I had chosen to be in could function at a high level. I think Baton Rouge has always been it's a small market, and so the construction industry in Baton Rouge is a small market, and so being able to get out of town and seeing the different way of doing it, there was no question in my mind that was a big part of our success. Was we could put a glass ceiling on Catfish Town. It could be done. Right. We could build, another project that everybody said couldn't be built was, our good friend Trey Trahan, as you know, was a great architect, just won Designer of the Year in the country, by the way. But, his designs are hard. They're different. They're unique, and nobody could build St. John Vianney Church. Right. But we didn't think it couldn't be done, and so it's because we had kind of experienced some of those things in another. So that was I think it's a big part of our success, was just find a way to get it done.
Yeah. So I asked this question of all of our guests. I did not give you a heads up on it, so
that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
That you would do something like that to me.
Let's see how this works out. Okay, so looking back on your childhood, is there any memory that you can identify as your first entrepreneurial thought or activity?
It was. Jimmy Milano and I, who lived across the street from me, we sold lemonade and icy cups, and we got that idea really from St. Thomas More. They sold.
That's right. Yeah.
If you remember, the lady across the street would sell frozen cups of ice. Basically, just had some sweetener in it, flavored ice. Right. And so one weekend we decided to do that, and I can't say that we were ultimately successful at that, but we had a lot of fun, and interestingly, as time moves on, I happen to be involved in Lemonade Day with Todd Graves and his organization here, and it got me to thinking about what you learn, whether you learned it intentionally or not. But it's important that you had to find a way. Somebody had to finance you. Your parents, may have given you the lemonade, and then you had to go out and sell. And at the end of the day, nothing happens till you sell something, and it's all about selling. So that was the best that I can remember, is just doing that lemonade with Jimmy.
So, what a guy.
Yeah, he is.
So, last thing I wanted to ask you to touch on is your charitable endeavor, Bluer Skies.
Yeah.
And tell us about Bluer Skies.
Bluer Skies is a foundation that we started. It's solely focused on children and children's needs, and so what we do is the people in all the MAPPs have the opportunity to donate annually or every paycheck, and they put a certain amount aside, and then we create 3 funds: one for New Orleans, one for Baton Rouge, one for Dallas, and now one for Austin as it will start to grow. And then there's a committee of MAPPs that will, in each place, that will decide or make a recommendation of where they want to donate money to. It has to be a children's, some type of children's charity, and so then we distribute those funds. And so it's an opportunity. We match, if a certain amount of money that each person would give, MAPP will match a portion of that. And then we also do an annual golf event, and all of the funds of the golf event run through Bluer Skies, or Blue Skies, what do you want to call it, Bluer Skies, and then that goes to Children's Hospital. And so we've been fortunate enough over the last 4 or 5 years to give a substantial amount of money to Children's Hospital here in Baton Rouge, and we're real proud of that. But it's a good, I think, at the end of the day, and you do it better than most, Andrew, we've been fortunate, and so you have to always give back, and so that's the purpose of it.
Yeah, well, continued success with that, and with all of your business adventures. You have had an amazing career, Mike, and I'm just couldn't be more pleased with all of your success. And
we're not done yet. So
no,
we're not retiring, either one of us, are we?
That's right. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know I could talk to you for so much longer. There's so many other things that I could dive into with you, which says a lot about who you are and what you've done. So thanks again for your time, Mike, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Well, thank you very much.
And that was Mike Polito with MAPP Construction. I think Mike's gift as an entrepreneur is his leadership skills. Mike is excellent at team building and puts a great emphasis on the people that he hires to help him expand the footprint of MAPP Construction. They've had a stellar career, and he's done an excellent job. Mike can be reached through his website at mappbuilt.com, MAPPBUILT.com. You can listen to The Next Entrepreneur on iHeartRadio, Apple Music, Spotify, or Stitcher. You can follow us on our YouTube channel and on Facebook. The Next Entrepreneur is produced by Propel Productions. Our producers are Daniel Sagona and Benjamin Connell.